Gibraltar is home to Pragmatic Solutions and a place that I've called home since 2004. Long established as one of the leading remote jurisdictions for iGaming, Gibraltar has served some of the biggest operators in the industry with Evoke, 888, Bet365, Tombola, Rank, and many others, all based here, as well as Pragmatic, who calls Gibraltar our HQ and our home. There's been a lot of evolution in the industry since the first model that governs the regulation around iGaming in Gibraltar was established. And recently, Gibraltar has published and passed in Parliament a new gambling act. Today, I have Steven Caetano, senior partner with ISOLAS, one of the leading law firms here in Gibraltar that advises businesses on the regulatory landscape for iGaming, and Nicky Macias, who's the Secretary General of the Gibraltar Betting and Gaming Association and represents his members, who are many of the operators, biggest names in the industry that are based here in Gibraltar. We're going to discuss the new Gambling Act, what its intentions are, what it marks as an evolution and a modernization of the previous model here in Gibraltar, how it's being implemented and the timing for that, what it means to GBGA members and what it means to businesses looking to base themselves in Gibraltar, and how it works in conjunction with the new treaty that changes the livability and the dynamics of the border relationship that we have with Spain and the EU, and how the combination of the two creates a very strong business opportunity for companies basing themselves in Gibraltar to attract talent, enjoy all the benefits of the strong regulatory model and the fluidity of proximity to the south of Europe. Thank you for joining me for this discussion. We have Nicky Macias and Steven Caetano talking about the new Gibraltar Gambling Act. Nicky Macias, Secretary General of the Gibraltar Betting and Gaming Association, and Steven Caetano, Senior Partner at ISOLAS, specializing in iGaming and M&A and corporate. Great to have you both with me for one of my favorite topics, which is Gibraltar as a jurisdiction for iGaming. I've been here since 2004 myself. I'm proud to call Gibraltar home. I'm proud to have the majority of my career took place in Gibraltar as a leading jurisdiction for the biggest gaming operators in the world. There's a lot going on in the global market for iGaming and the transition that has long been established now to a point of consumption from what Gibraltar originated as a point of provision licensing model. And Gibraltar is sort of marking another milestone in that evolution with the publishing and the implementation of a new Gambling Act. And I'd like to talk about that. I'd like to talk about what that means to operators that are here, both B2C and B2B, what that means to other companies in the industry that will understand the foundation on which companies that base themselves in Gibraltar stand. But I think to understand where we are today and where we're going in the future in Gibraltar, it's important to understand how Gibraltar got here and became established as the world's leading jurisdiction for the top iGaming operators. We have Bet365 that is here. We have Entain, 888, BetVictor, Pragmatic, DAZN, QuinBet, Kindred, Tombola, many others. Many of the leading companies employ hundreds of people in this jurisdiction. It wasn't obvious. There were many jurisdictions that competed for the standard that Gibraltar had established back in the early 2000s. But Gibraltar did a great job of attracting the world's leading operators to be here. And as a result, the leading stakeholders in the industry have some nexus to Gibraltar. And I think it'd be an interesting place for us to start, Nicky, maybe start with you about how did Gibraltar come to be that important on the global stage for iGaming, and what were the attributes that made it so attractive to do business here?
Wow, that's a good introduction. And look, thank you for inviting me. I'm going to focus more from a regulatory point of view. I think there's many facets to why Gibraltar is such an interesting place. I think Stephen might then delve upon the wider environmental and ecosystem in Gibraltar. But from a regulatory perspective, we were one of the first jurisdictions, I would say, in licensing and regulating remote gambling. And I know this because I was the first gambling regulator in Gibraltar, and I remember being part of the International Association of Gambling Regulators and the Gaming Regulators European Forum, where all jurisdictions around remote gambling would meet together to discuss common standards for remote gambling jurisdictions, etc., etc. So we were once one of the first ones to regulate. We had a point of supply model back then. Indeed, we still have a point of supply model, which means Gibraltar is a very small geographic area. You're not in Gibraltar to offer your services to Gibraltar and Gibraltarians only. It is worldwide. So gambling is offered at the point of supply. And back then, that was the established model. So Gibraltar was one of the hubs where you could provide your services from. The gambling was taking place in Gibraltar. We had a very strong regulatory setup. We had a very strong licensing system. We have a very pragmatic way of regulating. It is robust, it is strong, but there's engagement taking place with industry. And that is one of Gibraltar's key strengths to this day, which is the ongoing dialogue between government, regulator, and industry. And that is still in place now.
One of the key demands I understood from Gibraltar from the inception as a regulatory jurisdiction was the substance requirement, and that me, like many of the people that I came to work with in arriving in Gibraltar, all the senior people were here. So there was engagement with the regulator and with local advisors and support businesses on campus, if you will. Gibraltar's a small place, and everybody being here was quite unique to the model that Gibraltar had. And it was, as someone working in the industry, it was interesting model to have the substance of the businesses all be centralized where the license was issued from. And I think that was part of the standards, Steven.
Yeah, I think this came because at the time, legally, it was quite important to establish where the betting transaction was taking place. Right. Yeah. Gibraltar took sort of the robust approach of saying, well, everything has to be in Gibraltar. Yeah. Servers have to be in Gibraltar, executives have to be in Gibraltar, and the management and the operations have to be here. And I think started on the right track, because as we've seen, that model has proved to be the successful model in terms of transparency, credibility, of being able to justify the operations actually being managed or controlled from the jurisdiction where the company says it's based. Mm. And that's what we call substance and real presence in Gibraltar, real jobs, real contribution to the economy by way of taxation, and real offices. And we've always had this requirement, as you say, from the very beginning, 2004, 2005, where sort of the Gambling Act was passed. And now with the new legislation, effectively what we're doing is we are formalizing that requirement by adding it to the new Gambling Act in terms of substantive presence. And it's a combination of factors. It's not just people or officers or ticking boxes like other jurisdictions where if you fulfill certain requirements, the license is yours. The regulator would ask the applicant how they propose to run the operation and how they propose to set up their operational substance in Gibraltar. So the burden's almost shifted to the operators to show a credible business case and to see exactly how they propose to run their B2C or B2B business from the jurisdiction. And I think that the balance was right at the time. It was spot on in terms of pragmatism and formality of regulation. I think the balance was right at the time. The legislation was passed, quite novel. It was a novel one of the first jurisdictions to regulate gambling, and it proved to be successful. Just to see the flotations that some of the companies achieved in London Stock Exchange at the time.
I think I've got to add to this because I'm totally valid. But as a regulator as I was at the time, we took the position that if you're going to regulate properly, you need to have your licensees in your jurisdiction. How can you exercise any extra jurisdictional authority? But that was a conversation that we were having back then. How do we regulate properly? And we required the companies to have substance over here in Gibraltar. That does add for proper regulation. Now, for your viewers, if they don't know what the geographic size of Gibraltar is, I think it's important for them to know. It is a place where everything is in close proximity, which meant that we could have an issue arise first thing in the morning of a regulatory nature, and by lunchtime we had already visited the operator to discuss whatever this regulatory issue was. So our regulatory model was very different from any other remote gambling jurisdiction that allowed their licensees to be based overseas. There would have to be more remote communication with them back in 2005, 2006, 2007, whereas over here in Gibraltar, we had that close proximity. And it's something that is very useful for us as an association right now, the Gibraltar Betting and Gaming Association, where whenever we have any issues arising which is of mutual interest to all members, to all licensees, we can convene meetings at very short notice. So we can get people around the table at very short notice. So we are a very agile jurisdiction. We're a very agile association, for example. And I think that adds to the appeal.
Yeah, if the three of us gathered on this topic, if I wear the industry hat for a moment, from my perspective, what Gibraltar meant as a business basing itself here was everything that you've set out, all those high standards, this difficult club to join, but prestigious club to be a part of, translated also into credibility with suppliers. Suppliers dealt with you differently at a different standard because they knew you had already passed a vetting process to be based in Gibraltar in the first instance. And ultimately, consumers recognized that Gibraltar was a higher regulatory standard, and that meant that I might be more successful in acquiring customers for my business, for the customers that go to the extent of scrutinizing who they're playing with at that level, right? So there was everything that you were doing locally also had a sort of a ripple effect for the business outside of Gibraltar in terms of establishing credibility in that first couple of decades of the industry. But the industry has evolved very rapidly, and I think it's exciting that Gibraltar's moving with it and sought to modernize and codify a lot of what was evolved in terms of regulatory requirements and practices, actual ways of operating in Gibraltar. So we're on the cusp of a transition now. The market has changed, and Gibraltar's responded with a new gambling act. So let's talk about the new gambling act. What does it set out to do? Who does it touch? Does it expand the scope of what Gibraltar's regulation covers? Who wants to take that one?
I think the key word is modernisation, and I'm using that from previous engagement with the government. And I think recently we've also had that put through Parliament that we're modernising Gibraltar's gambling law. So modernisation is key. We need to keep up to pace with the industry. The original act was 2005. We are now in 2025. Actually, you know the same as I do, the same as Steven knows. The industry has changed so much. We are a high-tech industry. We change from one month to the next, let alone since 2005. I remember back in 2005, some people had Blackberries, but mobile telephony was not as advanced as it is right now. So it's only right that we should modernize. The existing act, the old act was catered towards B2Cs with a small provision for software suppliers, because back then you had your software integrated into the B2C's platform. Of course, that's changed now. Software suppliers, game suppliers have their own, they provide from their own servers. They've got multiple clients worldwide. We've had this shift to point of consumption, and so therefore we need to modernize the gambling framework in Gibraltar. There was a lot of emphasis. In fact, there was only emphasis on technology in the old act. So if you have technology in Gibraltar, for your gambling, you are required to have a license. So in essence, you could have, and I know that we evolved from them, but in essence, you could have your operations running out of Gibraltar without any technology in Gibraltar, and you could possibly argue you wouldn't need a license because you don't have your equipment in Gibraltar.
Or looking at it another way, Nicky, you weren't eligible for one. So, if you wanted to be a part of the club of operators and suppliers that are licensed locally, unless you had equipment here, unless you had hosted here, you weren't eligible at the door. It wasn't captured in the previous model.
That's a good point. And we should add that technology has changed a lot. There's a lot of cloud services provisions. That requirement to have all your technology based in Gibraltar is not realistic nowadays. So we need to adapt to the changing times, and hence the modernization. I'll stop at that.
Yeah, I think the legislation, what it does is, in terms of substance, what it does is it says that, well, substance can mean one of a few things. It could be presence of IT servers and equipment, could be manpower, human resources on the ground, office space, contribution to tax, and sort of other factors a minister may prescribe. So substance can take different forms depending who the applicant is and what the operational setup is. But what does a Gambling Act bring in apart from modernizing, it sort of reinforces the credibility of the jurisdiction and provides greater transparency. It provides for example, an appeals mechanism, which we've never had in Gibraltar, where an appeal can be made to an appeal tribunal specifically set up under the Gambling Act to examine decisions which may be questioned by the applicant. So licensing decisions were always discretionary and accepted in finality. Now there's an appeals mechanism which has been brought in. We have a regulated individuals regime similar to the UK PML, which will come in perhaps not immediately after the implementation of the Act. There might be time given to the industry to align themselves on that. But that system's always been followed in Gibraltar on an ad hoc basis. Sort of controllers, key personnel have always been subject to regulatory scrutiny and checked up and actually filled in regulatory questionnaires and been approved by the regulator. Now will be a formal system whereby that attaches individually to the person, and that can be taken from one operator to the other with sort of renewal fees, etc. It also expands the menu of licenses available, whereas before we just had the B2C. Like Nicky says, it was catered for the B2C market, and then B2Bs came along and they were effectively given a B2B license under the auspices of a B2C. Now it's very, very clearly delineated. There is a B2C variety of licenses for sports betting and for casino, and there's also B2B licenses for aggregation, direct supply, and even a tiered system which encourages smaller operators to apply to the market. If they want to service Gibraltar operators, they could apply for a tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 B2B license, which enables them to grow.
And is that intended to appeal to, or let's say capture or appeal to companies that are already doing business in Gibraltar, or do you see this as attracting more companies to?
Both. I would say both.
Yeah.
I would say both. Historically, you had Section 26 of the Gambling Act, which said basically all software supply has to be approved by the regulator. The regulator, to approve suppliers who perhaps were outside of Gibraltar and not known to the regulator or the Gibraltar community, came up with this concept of sheltering over the years, where the system of the supplier was sheltered under the B2C operator systems in Gibraltar. So the regulator had access to the servers, to the logs, to the transactions on a drop of a hat, on a moment's notice. And that was the way in which the regulator was more comfortable with the supplier and capable of approving that supplier under Section 26. Over the years, sheltering became a system almost like an incubator system, where the supplier content was being looked at, tested, and subject to Gibraltar requirements. And over the years, if the supplier became quite big and started supplying other operators in Gibraltar, they were invited to apply for a B2B license in an informal way. The new legislation effectively accelerates that process and does away with the sheltering, which was effectively a system that came along to fill in the gap that the law had.
Yeah.
And that practice over the years has now been codified in terms of this menu of B2B licenses that I'm talking about. Whereas if you're an existing supplier and you don't feel like you're big enough and want to have so many customers in Gibraltar, you would go for let's say a tier 3 license, which would mean a smaller license fee, a lower amount of customers you can service your games to, but at least proportionate to the level of business that you have.
You could grow with your
and
business.
You can grow with your business, whereas before you had to apply for the sort of tier 1 B2B license, which was 85,000 a year, no matter your size and no matter the scale of your business. So I think now it's almost attractive for existing operators, suppliers who are being sheltered and want their own license, and for suppliers who may want to join the chain of supply in Gibraltar and may not perhaps require such a big and expensive license, and they would go for a smaller tier.
So, Nicky, how involved have the GBGA members been in drafting this new act? Has there been strong engagement from industry?
There has. So the consult, and this is something that Gibraltar does really well, and I go back to the key strength of dialogue between regulator, government, and the industry. So, look, the GBGA has a very good relationship with government and the regulator. We meet with them quite regularly. When it came to the consultation process on the new law, we were able to get our members around the table. There was very strong engagement from our members. They really wanted to know what, they had concerns to raise with government. And as the GBGA, we're a conduit to actually put forward to government and the regulator what the industry concerns are. So that's our job, aggregate their concerns and put forward to the government. They engaged with us on that basis. We did see changes to the law on that basis. And now we still continue that relationship. It's very, very important because we are now going through the most important phase, which is we've got the law, and now we're going through a transition process. We're going to implement the new law. And this is the tricky part, and this is the tricky area. We are now going to see how it operates in practice. How is the gambling division going to implement the rollout of the new act? Is there going to be any concerns once they do it? And so therefore it's important that we maintain this ongoing engagement with our members. It works two ways. We will call them round the table for meetings, but we operate on a basis of trust. And I'm happy to say that we reached a level of trust with our members, which is vital for any association. And you do get them coming to us with issues that they have in a proactive manner, which you can then put to government on an anonymized basis if necessary. So we do have that engagement ongoing. The Gambling Commissioner is very good and very engaging on the transition process, on the new law. We had a session with him very, very recently where he set out what the sequencing is going to be, how the law is going to be implemented, which is very, very important for our members because we are navigating changes in the industry, which is not just Gibraltar changes like the UK duty and the UK tax changes. So what we are looking for is as much clarity, as much certainty as you can get, and sequencing, when the provision is going to be rolled out, where the priority is going to be at the beginning, when we're going to be called, when our members are going to be called by the regulator to, amend their licenses to the new system. The personal management licenses or the personal licenses will not come into effect straight away. This will be done at a later stage. So it's very, very important that we are able to put to governments and the regulator what our concerns are. They listen. They explain to us what the sequencing is going to be. And like I said, our members are very engaged and we are very engaged with government.
So Steven, you set out that this is about certainty and codifying things that have evolved as the jurisdiction evolved with the needs of the industry. But it sounds like there's still some uncertainty around the implementation process, and that's where we're at now. So the act has been drafted, it's been passed by Parliament, and now there is implementation phase, and there's a good dialogue through the association and through just the nature of Gibraltar being a small community with the industry to actually put it into practice. So is that where we are today?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly where we are. I hope, I'd certainly expect to be implemented in April with a 6-month transitional period. So the 6 months give operators, the industry, plenty of time to meet with the regulator, to meet with the association, to check what changes they have to do, if any, to align themselves with the new requirements. But I would say this, when you analyze the legislation against the current requirements, I don't think, and this is just me thinking out loud, I don't think the approach is going to be very different to what it's been to date in terms of the regulator, in terms of how the regulator interacts with licensees, his team, how the gambling division interacts with licensees in terms of renewals, in terms of renewal requirements, the formalities, the forms, the returns, the quarterly returns. I don't think that's going to change. It's just that we have a more detailed piece of legislation now to point towards and to underpin these requirements. We have the possibility of new guidance, new regulations being passed under the new act. You've got flexibility. So you have the ability for the minister to pass regulations, to publish codes of practice in consultation with the Gambling Commissioner. And these codes of practice will be very, very telling in terms of the next 6 months to 1 year. We'll see what guidance is published, whether that changes too much materially from what we already have, which is remote technical operating standards. We've got the AML code, got the generic code, and we've got license conditions, and we've got the act, and together that forms almost the body of our legislative framework for gambling. So we'll see what guidance comes out, but I don't expect much change in terms of the audits, the inspections, the interaction.
Yeah, as you say, it's more about now that the rules are very clear, and where you are in a process and what your rights are at the stage in the process of the appeals opportunity, if that was relevant. These are all now set out, and there's fair standard for everyone.
The idea is to future-proof the industry, and of course, this legislation could have come sooner, could have come 10 years ago, 5 years ago, but the industry's done really well with the legislation it had, which is almost 20 years old. So it's almost in terms of building on that, and let's not forget one thing: if the treaty comes into place and provides that sort of guarantee, at least for the next 4 years, of free frontier fluidity. That's one of the biggest selling points that I've always thought Gibraltar has, which is you can live in Gibraltar, you can work in Gibraltar, you can live in Spain and work in Gibraltar, or you can spend your weekends in Spain and go to, drive across to Portugal and play golf in Portugal on a weekend and come back.
So
Monday.
Some of those listening or watching may not be familiar with what treaty we're referring to. A bit of a local.
True. Sorry, it's a treaty between the EU, the UK, Gibraltar, and Spain, effectively, which provides for Gibraltar to be a part of essentially Schengen zone without not being part of Schengen, which allows anyone in Gibraltar to be able to cross the frontier into the European zone without showing a passport or ID card. Effectively removes the physical barrier between Gibraltar and Spain, whilst preserving the independence and legal frameworks of both countries.
Yeah, one of the key benefits of this substance requirement in Gibraltar was that the executives in the industries that are here are actually here, and the treaty makes livability in this area even more attractive than it already was. I mean, let's face it, the border hasn't been that big an issue for those of us that are used to this dynamic locally to cross into Spain and enjoy the spoils of the Costa del Sol. But it's nice to have that as well be captured in a new working relationship with our neighbors and certainty, which collectively you already have. Gibraltar is a great corporate environment with professional services that are here, favorable tax for both the company and the executives in the business. You add to that lifestyle, and now you add to it in the iGaming industry a modernized and structured and codified regulatory model. Is the recent announcement that we've seen about a new license being issued for predictive markets an example? Is this something that we can expect to see more of in terms of now on the foundation of this new act, a more modern, forward-looking environment for innovation in the industry? Do you think that that's a byproduct of this process?
It could well be. I mean, I know that the minister was very active. I think he was at ICE in Barcelona, where he said he met with this applicant, and it's been advertised in the news that they've become FIFA sponsors, I believe, for this prediction platform. It may well be that it's a byproduct of the legislation or the buzz around Gibraltar in the last few months or year even. Or it may well be that he would have applied for a license anyway because of the reputation Gibraltar already had.
Right. Okay. So what are your members focused on now in light of these changes and these modernization of the Gibraltar model?
When it comes to Gibraltar and Gibraltar only,
let's start there. GBGA members.
Yeah, but as you well know, we're very international facing. But when it comes to the new law, it is actually rolling it out. So the new law, what we would like, as much as possible, is to know what is coming and when down the line, so that we can prepare for the rollout of the new law. It's not just a new law that's very topical. The treaty is very topical. We would like to know how that is going to impact us operationally. And again, we're engaging with governments on the matter. We're engaging with our members. We have, we are doing a lot of work on the treaty. We've got the UK duty changes taking place in the UK. All these tax changes. It is important for Gibraltar to continue to offer a stable environment with open dialogue with industry and nothing unexpected coming down the line, and with as much certainty as we can get wherever we can get certainty, because as you know, as a businessman, that is one of the key ingredients to being successful in business, as much certainty as you can. And so we're going through this period of uncertainty, aren't we? We all these changes taking place and all the new regulations taking place all over the world. And so therefore it is important to know what is coming and when, so that we can prepare properly for a rollout of the new law, treaty, etc.
I think the environment is such that the impression people have these are all positive steps. I think the uncertainty comes from just that we're at an implementation phase in both the treaty and the new act. But I think we can see the positive rationale behind both initiatives, and that it paints a bright picture for Gibraltar's relevance and value going forward.
Yeah, I mean, the new act was coming, 10 years ago. So it's not like we've been caught out of place by the new act. We've been more than ready to face the changes. It was first talked about in 2016. When a paper was produced about setting out the vision for the future. But
I think to Nicky's point about certainty, I think there's probably some relief that it's finally passed and it's being enacted.
And operators, I mean, naturally they're quite used to adapting to change. I mean, you're facing global operations. You're looking at regulatory outcomes and legislative developments in every market you're active in. So you're looking at changes in law from certain regions in India to all over the world. So in terms of adapting to the new requirements, I don't think that's going to be very hard for operators to do that. Just a question really amending policies and amending procedures. Subtly, I mean, again, I don't expect major overhaul in terms of how things are done in Gibraltar, have been done for the last 20 years with the new legislation. I just think it's more sort of progression and development of formalization procedures, but there's no major change as far as I can see. If you're a marketing business and you were in Gibraltar and you don't want a license and you're now caught by the new legislation, then yes, by all means, it's time to either redomicile or seek your license or restructure. But if you're a normal gambling business already based in Gibraltar, these changes are just really a progression of what you've already been experiencing here.
Yeah, so there are elements of support services to the industry, like marketing services or game provision and things like this, that may have existed informally in Gibraltar that now have an opportunity to be a licensed business to provide their services. And it may to some extent mean that those that choose not to apply for licenses or don't qualify may not continue to do business in Gibraltar. But Gibraltar's always been a prestigious yacht club with limited berths, as you've said, Nicky. As we close on the topic, I'd be interested to know where you think Gibraltar is in 5 years' time. And that's a bit of a crystal ball question, but how do you feel about this inflection point we're at now with both the treaty and the act coming in, and what is your outlook on the future for the association members, those that are already in the club, and potentially from a growth in Gibraltar perspective? Stephen, maybe we'll start with you.
Certainly very, very positive outlook, because if we have this sort of ideal situation of a sort of economic zone between Gibraltar and our neighboring La Linea in Spain, and you have people being able to set up businesses in Gibraltar and Spain and travel freely across the land frontier, which we've always had the uncertainty of queues and delays and traffic, etc. And you have this sort of shared economic prosperity zone, which the politicians talk about relating to the EU treaty. Well, I see a lot of potential where you can have support businesses setting up in Spain on the Spanish side and supporting businesses in Gibraltar. You have employees.
So the geographical limitation evaporates.
That's been removed. Yeah. We've never had that sort of removal of the geographical limitation. There's always been sort of, we've got to go to Spain. There could be a 2-hour queue, could be 45 minutes, could be 4 hours. That's automatically been removed. And I feel quite positive that it could be a sort of a closer bond between the two communities. At the same time, businesses can flourish. They could invest in Spain, sort of low-cost investments where property is traditionally very expensive in Gibraltar.
Yeah, which comes back to, employees bear the cost of Gibraltar's limited residential opportunities for employment here. means that it adds to the cost in operating a business. And if there's more opportunities for people to have fluid transition across the border for their homes there, or certain services could be based on the Spanish side, it might mean that businesses can grow their the activities that take place centered around Gibraltar in the greater area.
Exactly. And there's also this sort of talk about, again, the last 10 years, whether crypto and blockchain are going to really sort of form part of what is the gaming industry.
Right.
And
Gibraltar's led in the crypto regulation as well.
Yeah, it's led on that framework for quite some time. Also been a pioneer in that regard. So I would hope, at least for the good of Gibraltar, and if indeed the market requires it and the industry requires crypto gaming or crypto betting, that a reputable crypto betting or gaming operator establishes in Gibraltar, or there is a framework which allows for that. And again, would be the first one in the world, as far as I know, where you could apply for a sort of crypto gambling license, with both regulators in Gibraltar, with the crypto licensing already being firmly within the financial services framework, with the new Gambling Act sort of being based on the financial services framework, which we've had for 20 years, which has worked so well. There is a potential there for great synergies.
I think it's one thing we tend to take for granted in Gibraltar, and Nicky, you talked about this a bit earlier, is that everybody is here, and that means that professional advisors like ISOLAS that can support those that have an innovative new product or service, or want to try to navigate where their business opportunity may fit in a regulatory context, in terms of, let's say, the example you set out, where if there is a convergence of crypto regulation with gaming regulation, it's likely to happen here in Gibraltar, because Gibraltar's led on both regulations for applying to both industries, and the advisors that understand that are based in Gibraltar and have a direct dialogue and access to government. Everyone is a 6 kilometer radius away from each other. So, Nicky, how do your members feel? But put the question to you then. Looking ahead, GBGA membership, what's the 5-year forecast?
This industry, as you know, is very, very resilient. We've been able to navigate quite some seismic changes, like UEFA in 2006. We were able to navigate the shift to the point of consumption regime, especially in the UK in 2014. We navigated COVID, we've had the treaty, and we're navigating the treaty. We've got all these changes coming from the UK, and we're navigating them. But we can't do it alone. We need to do it in an environment that supports that resilience. And that is something Gibraltar has always offered. They've always offered a safe and steady pair of hands. This close engagement that exists between the industry within the GBGA because of that proximity, that ongoing dialogue that exists between the industry and government, and the industry and the regulator at GBGA level, but also on separate independent levels. What that means is that government is in a position to know what the industry needs, what the industry wants, is very alive to what works for the industry. And as long as we keep this dialogue going, as long as Gibraltar keeps that key strength going, we will show resilience. We will continue to navigate all these changes. We will continue to navigate not necessarily just the seismic changes, but any modernization laws or any changes internationally. We will be able to navigate those quite well. And as long as Gibraltar continues to provide that, actually, I'll keep it at that. I think that we will be on good ground.
Well, the only thing certain is change, right?
That's the only certainty.
Yeah, and Gibraltar has a good track record for rolling with the punches that the greater global landscape for this industry has thrown at it as a jurisdiction, and navigate that such that this many years on, the biggest in the business are still here. And I think this has been a helpful discussion to sort of unpack a bit what's changing and what's not changing, and what's certain and what's still remains to be defined. I'm a big fan of Gibraltar as a place to live and do business, and I'm very proud to be here and proud to be able to do business here. And we do business here because of the environment and the support that we have with proximity to the people that are in control of the regulations that apply to our industry, of the advisors that are experts in how to navigate it, and of the talent that we're able to attract here. So I thank you, gentlemen, for joining me for a discussion of one of my favorite topics, which is the place I call home.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me.
Cheers.